Have you ever wondered what makes Leatherface such a terrifying villain? Sure, he's got that iconic mask and chainsaw, but there's a whole lot more to him than meets the eye. Let's dive into the world of Leatherface, from his origins to his modern interpretations and everything in between. We'll explore 9 different comics, and in doing so, explore his motivations, the different interpretations of his story, and why he's become such a horror icon. So settle in and let's get ready to get scared. Before we get into our explanation though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Leatherface, 1991, issue number 1. So how do things begin? A random Texas night. The snakes are hunting, and so are the coyotes. And can't forget the armadillos. But on this silent night, a woman is screaming and pleading for her life. And who's she so afraid of? None other than our friend Leatherface. He brings his giant sledgehammer down on the woman's head and spills her brains all over the floor. And what does he do next? He makes himself a new mask from her face, of course. Next, we see some men in a hole, and they come across a skull. Could it be the woman's skull? The scene changes again as we see a man and a woman heading from Los Angeles to Florida in a car. Ryan is irritated as news of dead bodies comes on the radio. A state trooper pulls them over, and we learn that Michelle is delivering the car to her father, and along the way, they plan to take a detour to the Chainsaw Massacre Festival. On their way, an armadillo pops out of nowhere and Michelle runs it over. Ryan puts it out of its misery, but next we see a cowboy-looking fella stepping out of a car and making his way to a gas station, calling out for a man named Alfredo. Meanwhile, Ryan and Michelle pull up to the same gas station, and the cowboy tells Alfredo that he's got customers, and Alfredo looks pleased in a very, very creepy way. He's a funny-looking man with a hanging eye patch, and he greets Michelle and Ryan in the creepiest manner possible. Alfredo's sleazy behavior obviously annoyed Michelle, but she got distracted by the revving engine of a cool-looking monster truck. And I mean, we can't really blame her, it's a really cool-looking monster truck. And finally, the cowboy tells Michelle to call her Tex. Tex, who lives in Texas. That's a really good nickname. Now, Michelle went to the washroom, and the one-eyed guy, Alfredo, decided to take a peek through a hole. What a pervert. Alfredo gets caught by Tex, and in a fit of rage, he pulls out a shotgun and tries to blast it at the couple as they barely escape. But Tex is shot dead. Or was he? Later that night, Ryan and Michelle were driving along the highway just trying to get out of town. But what's that behind them? Looks like the monster truck from earlier is passing them, and someone tossed a dead coyote onto their windshield. Unfortunately, they realize their tire's been slashed, so they get out of the car to analyze the situation. This turns out to be a mistake because they hear the sound of a chainsaw buzzing, and Leatherface emerges from the bushes. Issue number 2. Ryan is the kind of guy who tries to argue with everyone, so of course, he tried to argue and reason with Leatherface. I mean, you gotta love the energy, but nobody really argues with Leatherface. Leatherface is distracted by Ryan's words, and Ryan takes advantage by kicking him in the nuts and gets in the car with Michelle. They flee together, but things don't go smoothly and they soon get into an accident, but they're saved by the guy they bumped into. He says his name's Benny and introduces himself as a survivalist. They're interrupted by the same monster truck they saw earlier, and Benny is almost run over by it. He manages to escape, but here comes Leatherface, who tries to cut Benny in half. Benny beats him up with his rifle and gets hurt in the process. Some girl distracts Leatherface, and the cowboy, Tex from earlier, pops up out of nowhere. Wasn't he supposed to be dead? No, that was all a little scheme played by him and Alfredo, the guy at the gas station who pretended to shoot Tex so that Ryan and Michelle would leave. Now, Ryan and Michelle trusted Tex, and things were getting hectic, so they tagged along with him through the woods, but he suddenly attacks and knocks out Ryan. Michelle barely manages to escape, but too bad, the monster truck driver, the guy with the hook hands, and Leatherface catch up to Benny, and the girl with him is dead meat. For those who don't know, the guy with the hook hands is related to Leatherface, and his name is Tink, who we'll learn more about in later issues. Issue number 3. Now, this hook guy, Tink, has always been nice to Leatherface, and Leatherface understands that. They find a music player and dance like a bunch of crazy people. Well, I guess they don't dance like crazy people, they are crazy people, but Michelle comes back and tries to look for Ryan. She doesn't know that Ryan's been captured, so she makes her way through the woods and escapes a few traps. She was hoping to find someone, some normal people, so she could get some help. She finally comes across a house and finds a little girl sitting on the porch. The little girl looks quite friendly, so Michelle asks if she can use her telephone, but things take a dark turn when Michelle saw that the girl was playing with a scary doll. Michelle saw that the doll was made of a human skull, and the little girl crushed Michelle's fingers with the doll's mouth. She manages to leave the room and finds herself surrounded by hundreds of bones and skeletons. At that point, Tex arrives and approaches Michelle, so she locks herself in a room. But it's not just a normal room in any sense, it's full of skeletons and bones, so Michelle had nowhere to go. Eventually, Tex takes Michelle to meet the rest of the family. The scene cuts to Alfredo cursing his way through the forest as he's ambushed by Benny. If you forgot, then let me remind you, Alfredo is the guy we saw at the gas station, and Benny is the survivalist who knocks him out. Alfredo falls into a puddle, and the scene cuts back to Michelle sitting amongst the rest of the family. Grandma is discussing some family history, and Michelle soon realizes that Tex's death was nothing but a scam. And then, Grandma brings out Leatherface, and he wastes no time in attacking Michelle. In the end, we get to see Ryan, who was bleeding and tied upside down. Unlike Tex, he's very, very, very dead. Sucks to be him. Issue number 4. Tink gives Leatherface a very new and beautiful saw, and he happily accepts the gift like a little child. But by then, Benny has reached the house and he shoots Tink. Michelle takes advantage of the situation and frees herself and kills Tex the cowboy. Needless to say, Leatherface is devastated because he loved Tink. He holds Tink in his arms and he dies. Benny is stopped by Grandma, but he knocks her out and kills her. Leatherface chops Benny's fingers off, but Michelle arrives just in time to stab him. Together, Benny and Michelle make their way out of the house. As they're walking through the forest, Alfredo gets up out of the puddle with his middle fingers upright and stops them. Leatherface catches up to them and he slices Benny's head right off his torso. Michelle somehow drowns Alfredo in the pond and knocks out Leatherface by hitting him on the back of the head. She thinks she's killed him, but the audience knows better. The next day, we see her walking along a deserted road. She feels sick and tired and a car catches up to her. The little girl from earlier gets out of the car, comes up to Michelle and tells her that she doesn't like her, then gets right back in the car. We see Leatherface sitting in the back seat as if nothing happened. And you guessed right, with all the Texas heat and starvation, Michelle is about to die a horrible death. Jason vs. Leatherface, 1995. Two of the greatest horror icons of all time coming together for a comic? Sign us up. Issue number 1. Despite its reputation, Crystal Lake was formerly referred to as an Eden, a haven for plays seeking to lose themselves in the splendor of summer and the beauty of the natural world. People cherished lounging by the gorgeous lake in the warm sun. Then again, everything was different. The lake changed after Jason's evil and unwavering hatred started to haunt it and everyone who went there. The lake was once an Eden, but everyone who loved and lived with Jason was haunted by his memories and turned it into hell. In the case of Crystal Lake, it had degenerated into a sizable puddle of contaminated water. R. Linhart, an industrialist, was responsible for dumping toxic waste into the lake. Jason, the most hideous and malevolent creature known to man, was lying at the bottom of this poisonous pool, not dead, but trapped and drowned. He knew that the people up there bathing in the sunlight feared him, even though he was still in complete darkness and had nowhere to breathe. There was to be a new building complex constructed. After that, the trash was loaded onto a truck and put on a train to be taken elsewhere. Jason was also loaded onto that train with all that junk. A homeless man was his unfortunate first victim. There was no stopping him after this. He killed the train's crew, including the driver. He punched one man in the face, drove a machete into the skull of another, and broke open the jaw of the final victim. The train derailed and was destroyed, as was to be expected. Jason was observed emerging from the ensuing explosion completely unharmed. Jason was taken by the train to a strange and unexpected location before it was destroyed, where he met someone who looked a lot like him, Leatherface, the Sawyer family's serial killer. A scared man ran towards Jason in the deep woods, asking for assistance in stopping some insane people. Before long, the people came to light, and we get to meet Leatherface and Hitchhiker. Jason launched an attack on Leatherface and was about to kill the man. Jason killed all the living, and Leatherface was attempting to take advantage of his kill to exact revenge. Jason was able to take control of Leatherface during their fight and even took his saw. Regarding the unfortunate man who was fleeing from them, he met his demise when Jason used his machete to cut half his face off while battling Leatherface. Jason had the opportunity to kill Hitchhiker and Leatherface with ease, but he chose not to. He allowed them to survive for some strange and unexplained reason. Jason was baffled as to why he chose to spare the two men. After praising Jason's method of killing the other man, Hitchhiker asks him to come to the Sawyer residence, and Jason accepts. We're introduced to Cook, the family cook, and Leatherface's uncle at the residence. Leatherface went up to his room to cry after Hitchhiker made fun of him for losing the chainsaw to Jason. Jason had never experienced family before. This was all new to him. For as long as he could remember, all he could remember feeling was hate and vengeance. However, Jason now realized everything. He identified with Leatherface. He saw someone who shared many similarities with him. Because of their appearance and unique characteristics, Jason and Leatherface were shunned by society when they were young. Both of them had become vicious serial killers as a result of their alienation. They were only human in appearance. The two grew close after Jason motioned for Leatherface to join him at the dinner table. Leatherface concurred. Cook seated them at the dinner table and introduced Jason to the rest of the family. Jason seemed to have found a new family and a new place to live. Issue number 2. That night, while sleeping at the Sawyer residence, Jason dreamed of the day he had drowned as a young child. How did a young boy almost drown with no lifeguard or counselors to help him? None of the other campers wanted to be his friends, even though the counselors had advised them not to enter the waters alone. That summer day, the water looked so inviting that Jason waded in regardless. The fearsome man-monster was terrified in his sleep by this nightmare, but it ended when Cook woke him up for breakfast. Hitchhiker's favorite dish, scrambled brains, was cooked to perfection by Cook. Do we have to mention that these are, of course, human brains? Hitchhiker picked up a one-sided argument with Leatherface and started beating him before they had eaten. Jason was reminded of another incident in his past wherein his father had beaten him when he was younger without any justification. Cook then showed Jason around his smokehouse and kitchen. Everywhere, bodies were dangling. Some were severed while others were beheaded. Cook spilled the beans to Jason about his cutlery secrets and his dream of opening a fancy restaurant with a fancy name. Hitchhiker was scheduled to go grocery shopping later that day. What they meant by groceries was more people and food. Leatherface would usually accompany Cook or Hitchhiker, but on that particular day, Cook recommended Jason go along. After killing an elderly couple, the two of them went on the road and returned with their corpses. The fact that Jason killed the woman without causing her to scream or squeal disappointed Hitchhiker. Jason killed her too soon, he grumped. Cook, however, was dissatisfied since he hoped to have some delicious, tender young people's meat. After returning from his hunt, Hitchhiker asked Jason to come inside his cabin so he could show him his artwork. He'd made his grandfather a rocking chair for his birthday, though he preferred to call it his hobby. The chair was made of human skeletons, but as fate would have it, Leatherface threw himself onto it by accident, destroying it. Hitchhiker became enraged by this and began insulting Leatherface. Still, Jason found himself in yet another childhood memory. Jason's father frequently chastised him, even going so far as to claim that Jason wasn't even his son. In that recollection, Jason's mother, Doris, used a machete to murder her husband in order to save her son. Jason saved Leatherface by slamming Hitchhiker away from him because he could relate to Leatherface. After how Hitchhiker had treated Leatherface, Jason was ready to kill him, but regardless of how much his elder brother mistreated him, Leatherface was unable to allow Jason to kill him. As a result, Jason decides to spare Hitchhiker. Issue number 3. That day's supper was going to involve some serious business. As it happened, Leatherface had been reading a comic book written by Hitchhiker. At the table, Hitchhiker approached Leatherface and showed him the Iron Man comics. The Hitchhiker was willing to go to any lengths to impart some knowledge to Leatherface. He even said that in addition to the leather mask he was currently sporting, Leatherface ought to get himself a new leather suit. Despite being a skilled serial killer, Leatherface had always been obedient to his older brother. Anyhow, Jason saved Leatherface once more and put Hitch in a difficult situation. Hitch plunged a knife into Jason's chest out of rage, not knowing the true nature of Jason. Jason goes after Hitch with his machete. Cook sent Leatherface to fetch his saw because he knew it would be difficult to stop Jason otherwise. Cook attempted to defend his older nephew in the meantime, but was ineffective because Jason had cornered them both. Jason was about to kill the cannibals when Leatherface lunged at him from behind. A bloody brawl broke out, with Leatherface taking Jason through the abdomen with his chainsaw to deliver the first real hit. For the first time in his life, Jason took care of someone other than his mother. All he received in return was suffering, and now he truly wanted to shield Leatherface from the abuse that his older brother inflicted upon him. Jason could see now that Leatherface was a real person who understood what love was, and all those who love and live must pass away. As the chainsaw and the machete began to clash, everything that stood in their way was cut down. Jason continued to hurt Leatherface while Cook and Hitch applauded him. He nearly cuts his own arm, but when Hitch comes at Jason from behind and shoots an arrow through his head, the fight is over. The insides of Jason's skull were bursting and raining down to the floor. For Jason, it was all over. Or was it? His blood was everywhere and he wasn't breathing. Hitch, looking dead, suggested they eat him along with the others. However, Cook had grown to respect Jason in some way, and he couldn't agree with Hitch. He couldn't bear the thought of stewing Jason. He therefore proposed that they encase his body in bricks and bind it with a rope before plunging him into a nearby body of water. Jason's machete was in his hand when Leatherface threw him into the water. What's more, Leatherface tossed a flower right in the middle of the ripples that Jason's drowning corpse had made. Leatherface loved his family more than he loved Jason, but it wasn't because he didn't understand what Jason was trying to accomplish. But wait, what was that? Jason has freed himself and starts walking along the bottom of the lake as if nothing had happened. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Special number 1. What do we have here? The year is 1972 and it's an average Texas summer. In a seemingly isolated house, a woman is chained up and she's probably being baited by a police officer. Who's she bait for? You guessed it, it's Leatherface. He starts up his chainsaw and slashes at the woman. So how did she get into this mess? Some time ago, a group of fugitives entered Fuller, Texas in their car. They go into a shop and the receptionist recognizes them and immediately calls the police. After stuffing the old woman in in the freezer, the gang finds out that their car has been messed with. One guy gets back to the freezer, but the old woman is nowhere to be found. Suddenly, he's hit by a big knife wielded by a fat woman. He's hit again, but this time the blow takes his head off. This strike was from the old woman, who has some serious muscle behind. The remaining gang members head to the woods, and a girl meets Leatherface while another man is forcing himself on her. She somehow manages to escape, but is again lured into a trap. Meanwhile, the other gang members are being tortured by the old woman and the sheriff. I gotta say, this comic is extremely graphic. Regardless, the girl manages to run away again and clings to a log of wood as she prays to God. She keeps repeating how she'll start over and live a clean life and be a good person, but it's too late. Leatherface catches up to her and cuts her in half. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Grind, issue number 1. Now this comic is about a group of choir girls who make the mistake of coming to the wrong town. Their bus gets a flat tire and the driver sets out to get help, but he's killed by Leatherface in a meat factory. To find the driver, their teacher, Mrs. Millsap, goes away and meets the same fate. Meanwhile, the local sheriff finds the bus and plants marijuana and takes the girls away in his car. He takes the girls to a confined space where he locks them up, and one by one they're sliced by Leatherface. What a fancy arrangement. Issue number 2. The girls somehow manage to injure the sheriff and escape the place. They rush towards the woods, but Leatherface finds them and kills one of them, taking her face. Classic. Meanwhile, the sheriff gets up and ties 2 girls with chains with the intention of killing them, but luckily they're freed, only to find out that Leatherface is behind them with a chainsaw. Issue number 3. Things aren't looking good for the girls as they're being chased by a chainsaw-wielding madman. Now they're counting their last moments while hiding in the dark. One of the girls, Marcia, is the first to be killed. The other 2 are found and knocked out. When they wake up, they find themselves tied to chairs. The worst part, one of them is killed and later served for dinner. The other one manages to escape and picks up Ellie on the way, along with a chainsaw. They get help from a man and flee the house. Good ending? No chance. She's somehow framed for the murder of all the other choir girls and is locked up in jail. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Fearbook. This is a one-shot comic, short and sweet. A bunch of hippies were heading for a picnic and they passed Fuller, Texas. They stopped for some food and drinks at Luda May's shop, but the sheriff was also there and things get sour when there's an argument. Charlie tells the sheriff that he has no authority over him, and in return, he gets punched and handcuffed. The sheriff takes Charlie to the Sawyer mansion and the remaining hippies follow. The girls go looking around for help and the sheriff signals Leatherface to come out. Leatherface wastes no time and immediately starts slicing up people. One by one, the hippies are murdered, except for one. Leatherface sews the face of another girl over the last remaining girl and dances with her in a sick manner. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, a fun fact about this comic is that it's set 1 year after the events of the 2003 film. Issue number 1. Just outside Travis County, a wild goose chase is happening between some fugitives and policemen. When the policemen finally catch up to the fugitives, they check the truck and find that it's full of dead people. But that's not all, because Leatherface emerges from the dark and slices everyone up. Now, a few days later, 2 detectives visit the town of Fuller, Texas to investigate the murders. After coming across a very hostile crowd, one of the detectives stumbles across a pit full of dead bodies. Issue number 2. Not only is it a pit, it's a whole damn tunnel. The tunnel leads straight to the Hewitt house, the killing grounds. The whole operation team gathers around the house but doesn't find anything suspicious other than a weird stench. The Hewitt family apparently covered everything up with their meat factory business. Meanwhile, a news reporter tries to get coverage and one of the women from her team, named Carla, is lured into a trap. The officers weren't provided the backup they needed, so they decide to take matters into their own hands. Issue number 3. Now, this poor girl Carla is about to become a meal. I think I just lost my appetite. The cameraman and the news reporter re-enter the meat factory to get help, but are tased instead. The cameraman is thrown into a pot of scalding water while the reporter helplessly watches. She manages to use the distraction to free herself, and meanwhile, the policemen are heading into the tunnel with all sorts of guns and rifles. Issue number 4. The 2 officers are rushing towards the end of the tunnel, but they don't know that they're being baited into a trap. Leatherface pops up in the tunnel and brings a horrifying death to one of the policemen named Hooper. The other officer gets out of the tunnel and reaches the meat plant. The news reporter is being chased by a man wielding a chainsaw, and in an awesome coincidence, the police officer comes to her rescue and shoots the guy. But it wasn't critical, and the 2 engage in an epic chainsaw versus chainsaw battle. The officer wins the battle and victoriously exits the meat plant. And that's when he comes face to face with Leatherface. Rhymes, am I right? And I gotta point out that this comic's depiction of Leatherface is quite terrifying. He's a towering giant. Issue number 5. Officer Baines engages in another chainsaw battle with Leatherface, but this time he loses and gets heavily injured when he tries to run away. But luckily, the news reporter Kim Burns arrives with her vehicle and runs over Leatherface. Meanwhile, Hooper is busy arresting the family members and discovers the level of cannibalism they've resorted to. He goes mad with rage and almost shoots someone, but he's stabbed by the little kid right in the heart. But the kid doesn't stop there and chops Hooper's head from right between the bridge of his nose. One officer has been drugged and raped by a family member for his seat. Yeah, we're not kidding. Actually, not just one, because Luda May also joins the party. Yikes. Kim Burns was trying to find the rest of the officers, but she gets kidnapped and wakes up on a table with the Hewitt family. Issue number 6. In a dramatic entrance, Officer Baines joins everyone at the dinner table, but he has a grenade in his hand and isn't afraid of blowing everyone up. He carefully unties Kim Burns and orders her to go as far away as she can, along with the last remaining officer. Leatherface grabs a knife and throws it right towards Officer Baines. And his aim is a little too good because the officer loses the arm that had the grenade. The grenade explodes, and Leatherface immediately grabs his chainsaw and slices the officer's neck. Leatherface catches up to the officer and Kim Burns, but Kim manages to escape once again. She reaches a local bar and begs for help, but literally everyone refuses to help her. Nobody wants trouble with the Hewitt family member. Leatherface once again catches up with her and stuffs her in a van, but this time Kim is determined to fight back and she throws him out of the moving van. To finish things off, she kills the driver and is finally free. And hey, it's daytime. We really enjoyed that last panel of Kim just walking off towards the sunrise. Talk about badass. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. About a boar. Fans have long speculated about Leatherface's early life since every villain has to start somewhere. In this comic book, we see the series of incidents that molded this psycho killer into the merciless machine that he is. We also get a glimpse of the mansion, which is in better shape than in the films. Mr. Hanson, the son's teacher, is paying a visit to Mrs. Hewitt. He came to talk about his worries about her son because his teacher believes that he needs special attention because of his actions at school. In the woods, we get to witness young Thomas having fun with what appears to be a squirrel carcass. It's obvious the young boy is fascinated by blood and violence. His distorted face may not look as menacing as it does in the movies, but his actions reveal a violent lust. Thomas approaches a group of children who are enjoying a leisurely swim in the lake and observes them from a distance. Due to his peculiar appearance and demeanor, he's not well liked by his peers. The children in the lake are repulsed when they see him and mistreat him, and one boy in particular throws a stone at him to get him to go away. Since there aren't many pupils in the town, Mr. Hanson tells Mrs. Hewitt from his house that the schoolhouse will be closing. Now that they've been transferred to a larger school in Lynchfield, Mr. Hanson is on his way to the city to take up his new role, but he really wanted to talk to Mrs. Hewitt about her son. He informs her of his introverted personality, which makes him unpopular with the students, as well as his lack of interest in any learning activities. Because of his unique nature, he's mistreated by others and becomes a target of bullying. He's not exactly good at learning, and his issues are making it harder and harder for him to fit in with the others. But Mrs. Hewitt seems unfazed and indifferent to his teacher's worries. Rather, she believes that her son's mistreatment is the fault of the other children. The teacher suggests that Thomas receive special education, but Mrs. Hewitt is adamant that her son is fine. The teacher gets to take a look around the house as she leaves the room because something is boiling on the stove. He discovers strange family photos with Thomas's sack covering his face and some plush animal heads hanging on the walls. There must be something especially unsettling about the Hewitts. However, Thomas stayed hidden in the woods after being chased off by the other children. The child who had thrown the stone at him, Jesse, makes the decision to leave the others and go home to finish some chores. Thomas ambushes him while he's strolling through the woods, rendering him unconscious before he even realizes what's happening. Jesse's stone has left his deformed face bloody, and now he's exacting revenge. We return to Mrs. Hewitt's home once more, where Mr. Hanson questions her regarding a few of Thomas's odd paintings. Mr. Hanson compliments his handwriting and inventiveness, but finds the artistic work itself repulsive and unnatural. The most startling detail about Thomas is finally disclosed by the teacher. Thomas appeared interesting in stitching and quilting for the first time when Mr. Hanson brought them up in class. The teacher was taken aback to discover that the majority of his needlework was completed with actual animal skins from deceased animals. The instructor had a suspicion that he killed and trapped those animals on his own. Despite this startling discovery, Mrs. Hewitt doesn't seem to be concerned and continues to act as though her son is doing great. The teacher leaves after expressing his obvious disappointment with the response and promising to file an urgent report to get her son some much-needed assistance. Jesse, meanwhile, awakens to discover that he's been strapped to a bed. He cries out for assistance, barely able to move a muscle. Thomas enters enters the room abruptly and he has a sack covering his face. Even though this is a younger version of Leatherface, his depravity isn't lessened. He uses heinous methods to torment Jesse and tears his skin with a scalpel, leaving behind a bloodied little child whose face has been severed in its entirety. A man carrying a rifle on his shoulders walks in response to the agonizing screams. When he gets there, it's too late for a heavily bleeding Jesse because it's Charlie, Thomas's uncle. He makes jokes about how Thomas was attempting to alter Jesse's face to resemble his own physical deformity. We learn that the entire family is made up of psychopaths when Uncle Charlie decides to dispose of the body in the creek in an attempt to hide any evidence of the crime. Jesse's skeletal face serves as a warning to us about the horrors that young Leatherface will inflict upon the world. In order to make the body easier to dispose of, Uncle Charlie asks for assistance chopping it up. The story cuts back to the teacher as he's leaving the building. Mrs. Hewitt shows up out of nowhere and smacks him across the face with a tool. His head nearly explodes from the impact and he passes away instantly. Muttering under her breath that her boy is fine, Mrs. Hewitt leaves. Uncle Charlie and Thomas are seen finishing up their cleaning duties in the last scene. Uncle Charlie is eager for dinner and Mrs. Hewitt tells him that when they get home it'll be ready. This is where the story ends, or does it? Even after decades, Leatherface continues to terrorize anything and anyone that comes his way. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Cut! You've got to check this comic out. While the younger guy is talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and insisting that it all happened for real, the older guy is enjoying his barbecue. The title card is then shown in a pull-out shot. Not only that, but we find out that this is Meatfest 07, which means we're going farther into the future than ever before. Yeah, it was real, the man replies. You can go to that house with me. In fact, I'm heading in that direction. The fact that he actually owns the van from the first film serves as our first hint that something is off. The hitchhiker shot the windshield in the back and it's still broken. Odd that it took them more than 30 years to clean that up, but okay. The film crew really wants to go down there and take a look, but the guy has a girlfriend and she's not too happy that she might miss the concert because of this. The main character makes the decision to travel to town while sitting in this local's van. He begins by discussing how much more of an edge there was in classic horror films. Also, it's a nice touch that they mentioned the Blair Witch Project in passing and how it was a contemporary movie intended to have a realistic feel. That's what he wants to do, he says. Blair, that has a different meaning around here. That's good because I used to think, oh, Blair Meat Company, like Blair Witch Project, whenever we watched a movie. In addition, he says he's discovered a number of these vintage How to Be a Butcher videos from back in the 1950s on eBay, and he finds them amusing. That's when he and the local start to argue a little. I saw those films back in the day, the local remarks. They never struck me as humorous. As soon as they arrive at the house, there are a few hints that something's wrong. As he notices that Leatherface is standing by the window, he remarks, the house is unlocked. However, they fail to observe that he actually took out a key there. They enter and conduct what amounts to a technical scout tour of the location, exploring the area and discussing possible scenes and shots. We honestly really enjoyed the exploration and highly technical discussion about movies. Unfortunately, the sound recorder is going to be our first kill of the comic. He makes the comment, hey, there's a buzzing sound. This microphone is new. Why is that the case? Naturally though, his microphone isn't the source of the buzzing. Although we really enjoyed the visual of the partially broken headphones telling you exactly what happened to that guy, we don't really see too much from this particular kill. Naturally though, Leatherface isn't by himself as we witness another member of the family emerge brandishing a large hammer. He intends to give the girlfriend a hard blow to the head. In the meantime, they discuss how they treat animals in those instructional videos. When the final man discovers what has been going on all this time, he's also dead meat. Like in the videos, he's tied up like a pig and dies a horrifying death. We're not going to spoil this one any further because it's comparatively newer than the rest, so you should definitely give it a shot. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Raising Cain. For those who don't know, this isn't the same as Raising Cain, a movie released in 1992. Issue number 1. A woman named Henrietta is giving birth to twins and Luda May is helping her. And let me remind you again that this comic is extremely graphic. The twins are named Cain and Abel, and a few weeks later, Henrietta tries to sneak away from the house for the sake of her children, but she's unsuccessful and is confronted by the family members. Only Abel was captured by the family and Cain was still with his mother. Henrietta died the next morning, but Cain was saved. Issue number 2. Many years later, Cain was adopted by a family and they took him to a doctor. He was explaining his dreams to the doctor and it's pretty disturbing stuff. During a hunting trip, Cain sees weird visuals yet again from time to time and almost kills his brother. His stepsister Becky goes missing and is later found dead. Cain picks up a rifle and heads into the woods to find the murderer. Without any hesitation, he shoots the man, but in his dreams, he comes face to face with Leatherface. But hey, he is named the Smithville Bounty Hunter, whatever that means. His first case, he has to track down Leatherface. This is gonna be good. Issue number 3. Cain sets out to find Leatherface and ends up in a house where his twin brother Abel has been living for a few years along with his wife and kids. Abel's wife Connie actually mistakes Cain for Abel and gets pretty handsy with him. She realizes that this isn't her husband and attacks Cain with a knife. Luckily for him, Abel comes back in time and is overjoyed to see his twin brother. How overjoyed exactly? Well, he straight up kills Connie for attacking Cain. Yikes. Cain seizes the moment and kills Abel on multiple charges. He takes Abel's babies with him and on the way kills a couple of his family members. Luda May and Leatherface finally confront Cain, but a flash flood interrupts them and Cain and one baby are washed away. But luckily, another of the babies is saved by Luda May, and history repeats itself because although Cain was found dead just like his mother, the baby with him survived and was picked up by a girl. Marvelous verdict! From the original screenplay to the latest reimagining, Leatherface just keeps popping up everywhere, always ready to scare us good. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Leatherface story is constantly evolving, and there are so many more chapters to be told. Even when the chainsaw stops revving, the echoes of his terrifying legacy linger. So the next time you hear a chainsaw revving up, remember these comics about our old friend Leatherface. That's it for this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.